We're all familiar with the cliche, the next speaker needs no introduction. The presumption, evidently, is one of two possibilities. Either that speaker has some lofty celebrity status that is so high an introduction is superfluous, and attempting it might be to tarnish the aura of irreproachability. Or the other possibility is that the next speaker has a message that is so obvious and self-explanatory that trying to introduce it would border on an affront to the intelligence of the audience. But in the case of Claudia Bernardi, the inclination to downplay an introduction comes from another direction. Instead of an introduction that sticks to the usual content, such as her training, her experience, her accomplishments, her vision, all of which are extraordinary in the extreme, and I'll get to some of those in a minute. What suits a preface to a presentation by Claudia Bernardi is not an introduction, but an alarm bell, a safety warning, or at least a wake-up call, because what you're about to hear and see has the inspiration, the courage, the insight, and the potential to change the way you understand faith, suffering, and beauty, and your relationship, our relationship, to the greatest fears we mortals can ever encounter, the absolute horrors of inhuman murder and maiming, and the attempt to destroy the memory of those victims. Claudia Bernardi grew up in a loving family in Buenos Aires. She and her younger sister, Patricia, who is also part of this story, were left orphans when their parents died when they were early in their teen years. Now orphans, these two attended the University of Buenos Aires, where Claudia began studying architecture, while her younger sister began in biochemistry and later turned to anthropology. The dirty war of 1976 to 83 erupted during their years as students. It was marked by the occupation of the campus by the Argentine military and the disappearance of many young people who would later become known as the desaparecidos and would eventually number up to 30,000 people. Claudia left her homeland in the midst of these trials in 1979 and continued her studies abroad, art and architecture, but soon, after the fall of the military junta, she was drawn into the investigation of the horrible tragedy of what had happened to her countrymen. She was drawn by the work of her sister, Patricia, who was now one of the founding members of the group that began to excavate the hidden and mass graves of the victims of that nightmare. The Argentine Forensic Anthropology team, which began its work in 1984, was soon also to get a new member, Claudia, who joined her sister. She learned the techniques and practical skills of forensic anthropology and encountered directly, by physical engagement, the human remains. And so she became a witness. And a witness, of course, also testifies, even to this unspeakable truth. She took these experiences in another direction, however, and came to understand that through art and expression, dance, film, song, as well as painting, a way of healing could be found for those who had suffered these living and dead nightmares. The project in El Salvador that she will speak to us about, which she will speak to us now, is of course only one of these many healing ministries. Her work has been exhibited in many sites. The list is extensive, and it includes many of the familiar places where these same human tragedies have occurred. The World Peace Center in Hiroshima, the Center for Building Peace in Donegal, Northern Ireland, Belgrade, Montenegro, and Serbia. She has also exhibited in Israel and many sites in the United States and Latin America. I told you I'd tell you something about her training. Let me just leave it at that she has an MA from the University of Buenos Aires and an MFA from Berkeley, and honorary doctorates as well. She has also been active in teaching and in collaboration in a number of universities, in institutes of art. The Universidad del Salvador, Colegio Nacional de Buenos Aires, California College of Arts, Mills College, San Francisco. I'll skip the rest of the list. The project that you're about to hear at is called Paredes de la Esperanza, the Walls of Hope. And I couldn't help but think, these are not only walls, but in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they speak of icons, which are paintings on surfaces, walls, that are not really walls, but windows. An icon is a painting that draws our eye through the solid matter that is the image into that place which is beyond it. This is an expression of faith, our human effort to see and understand what's beyond our sensual capacity. And that reminded me of this expression from the Epistle to the Hebrews. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the esperanza. And so she, like Oscar Romero, is both a witness to faith and one who draws us to build on that substance that we hope for. And so, my friends, put your seat backs in the upright position, your tray tables up, buckle your seat belts, and I might even advise you put on a crash helmet, for we're in for a liftoff you'll never forget.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Patrick, for the introduction. I don't deserve it, but it sounded great. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so happy to be here. I would first like to say thank you to so many people, the organizers of this wonderful event, the Kellogg Institute, so many participants, Gilberto, who is going to receive us this evening, Maria Elena, Teresa, muchas gracias for all the work you have done. Victor, a usted. Y sobre todo, above all, I want to thank a very, very dear new friend in my life, the person who is behind this organization, who is tireless, and who is a mentor to a lot of us, an inspiration for me, Father Pelton, Father Bob. Father Bob and I met last year about this time when I came to the University of Notre Dame to work in a series of artworks invited by Segura Arts, Segura Publishing, Segura Studio, I think is the correct name today. But I was also invited to give a talk right here last year. And then that was the time in which I met Father Bob, and I think out of that became also the first steps, I think, of this conference, right? Is correct. So since I came here, I have been meeting people who have worked for so many years in El Salvador, who have been so committed to the work of Latin America, people who are legendary, like Father Gustavo Gutierrez, que honor conocerlo. So what can I say? How can I contribute to this conference, to this amazing meeting? And in thinking about that, first of all, I want to say that I am from Argentina, so I have been very careful not to, like the Salvadorians say, no saludar con sombrero ajeno. I don't want to say hello with a borrowed hat. So I am honoring first and above all the Salvadorian people with whom I work. They are the true subjects of this presentation. So when Father Bob and I talk over the course of this year about this very lecture, I was confronted with a question again, what can I say? And what I like to say at first is that I knew very little about Monsignor Romero for a big part of my life, and that has to do with the military junta, right? When I was in Argentina, censorship worked very, very well as not to have this information. When I got to El Salvador and when I was working in California with Salvadorian people, before I went to El Salvador in 1992, the image, the presence of Monsignor Romero was so palpable, it was so real, that to me that in itself constituted a great learning process. And then, of course, learning through the eyes of the Salvadorians, who was Monsignor Romero. And in a way, to learn about who the Salvadorian friends were and the history of El Salvador through Monsignor Romero's eyes. So that's the thesis, perhaps, of this presentation, that is about how we remember Monsignor Romero. I am among people who know very well the history of El Salvador and also the geography of El Salvador, so this map looks almost redundant, but I want to show you where Perquín is so we can localize where it is. Around here. So, Perquín in El Salvador is in Morazán. Morazán was before the war, during the war, and after the war, one of the poorest places in El Salvador, a place hugely affected by the war until today. Y este es Monseñor, claro, bienvenido el día de hoy. And as I said, I am almost embarrassed to confess that I knew so little about Monsignor Romero when I first arrived to Berkeley, actually, in 1979, 1980. It was through the eyes of my Salvadorian friends that I learned about Monsignor and about what he meant for so many people. And because this was 1980, I was in Berkeley already a student when Monsignor Romero was assassinated on the 24th of March. And I saw the suffering of the Salvadorian friends, but also the suffering of the Nicaraguan friends and the Guatemalans. And I was wondering, how is it that for me, Argentine, I don't know about him? And it came the reflection that the Argentine military junta had been extremely cautious and effective about fracturing this connection of Argentina with the rest of the continent. We hardly knew about the Nicaraguan revolution. We didn't know about the actions of El Salvador and Monsignor Romero as being the pillar, as that everyone remembers and still remember the voice of the voiceless. So the way in which people related to Monsignor from California also was, remembering what was happening during the funerals of Archbishop Romero, that so many people walked from very far distances under enormous difficulties and among very, very unstable political situations. Yet they did go. And many did not return from the funeral because, as you know, there was shooting to the crowd that came to honor Monsignor Romero. It took many, many years until the vivid memories of the funeral of Monsignor Romero came back to me in my life when I arrived to Perquín many years after, in 1992. And it came forward, that image, because I was meeting people who were survivors of massacres in Morazán, who had been survivors of the massacre in the Catedral while Monsignor Romero's funerals were going on. The reason for which I was in Morazán in 1992 was because I was part of the Argentine Forensic Anthropology team. The Argentine Forensic Anthropology team had been nominated by the United Nations Truth Commission to be the consultants per se, that was the legal term, the investigators of the massacre at El Mozote. The massacre at El Mozote, unfortunately, is not the only one massacre in Morazan. In fact, there are 349 massacres that are reported in the state of Morazan. The case of El Mozote is very well known for many reasons, one of which is that there's only one survivor. And the second part of it is the extent of the massacre. There were over 1,000 people killed in the small hamlet of El Mozote. The judge pertinent in the case decided that the first exhumation was going to be in a small building adjacent to the church. It was called the convent because that was the place where the priest who came to town would change garments. And that was the place where the exhumation took place. The original testimony that Rufina Amaya Marquez provided says that in that particular building, she saw from where she was standing that men and male teenagers were taken from the church. Many were executed in front of the church. She doesn't understand why this happens, why some men are exempt from being beheaded. But she does say in her testimony that men and male teenagers are taken into the church and the others are executed, including her husband. So for the case that we were investigating, the assumption was inside the building we would get to meet the human remains of adults, maybe teenagers. However, in that small building, we were able to identify the presence of 143 human remains, of whom 136 were children under the age of 12. The massacre at El Mozote, legally speaking, is the massacre that took place at the hamlet of El Mozote, but also the nearby villages La Joya, Jocote Amarillo, Cerro Pando, Los Toriles, and Rancheria. Those cases are less known. And it is one of those cases, the one I would like to share with you today. Here we are entering one area of Morazan, quite uninhabited at the time. We are going to La Joya and Jocote Amarillo. After the first exhumation that the Argentine team performed in 1992, and after presenting the outlines of the evidences found, the Argentine forensic team was forbidden to work, to continue working, or to even be in El Salvador. It took us a while to change that. All the military people that had been identified as responsible of this case were granted full amnesty the following year. It took the Argentine team many years to return to El Salvador and have a judge sign for us to continue exhumations, no longer as a criminal case, because everyone had been granted amnesty, but as a civil case to retrieve the human remains of the families who were still looking for the human remains of their relatives. In the villages of La Joya, Cerro Pando, Jocote Amarillo, Rancherias, there are more survivors. And this survival episode is connected to the fact that because the first massacre was at El Mozote, people from nearby villages heard the shooting and they also smelled burned meat, and that alerted them and left. They left and left behind mostly the very small children and the mothers and the elderly. All the other members of the community escaped, thinking that the army would respect them. So here we are in the year 2001, working in the massacre place of La Joya. The lady that you see there with a yellow dress is the aunt of Santo Seferina Diaz. Santo Seferina Diaz was a woman who did not live in this area. She lived elsewhere, further up in the north, close to Nahuaterique, actually close to Honduras area. But she had come to this area to give birth, and she did. She gave birth to a little beautiful daughter called Maria de la Concepcion, because the little girl was born on December 11th. So Santa Seferina called her Maria de la Concepcion. The people who buried Santa Seferina after the massacre, 2 men from the community said, "Las encontramos abrazaditas y muertas." We found them hugging each other and dead. And because they appeared to be sleeping, they took the blankets from the bed and buried Santa Seferina and the daughter into the mass grave we were about to exhume. What they also said is that before burying her with dust, with earth, they look at her for a while because she was so beautiful. And then they cover her with a cover, with a cobija. And this is what we are doing. Mimi and I are now retrieving the first layer of information, which is the first cover. The cause of death of Santa Seferina Diaz is a massive discharge of ammunition in the thorax area and 3 shotgun wounds in the cranium, shot at very short distance. What the blue pen shows are the evidence of the nuclear part of ammunition inside the orbit area in the cranium. But indeed, Santa Seferina was strangely and provocatively beautiful. And as I was thinking this, with a confusion of sentiments, I heard her aunt saying, "Si Monseñor Romero la viera, diría que es bien bonita." If Archbishop Romero would see her, he would say she's very beautiful. And I turned around and I said, "Why do you say that?" And she said, "Porque Monseñor Romero nos enseñó a ver cosas bonitas hasta en la muerte." Because Archbishop Romero taught us how to see beautiful things even in death. And that was the time in which I recognized after many years how palpable, how present Monseñor Romero was in the life of the people from the north of Morazán who have suffered so much and who were resourcing to him to understand or accept or not accept, but welcome or change, transform what we were looking at. This is the little dress that once contained the body of Maria de la Concepcion. Unfortunately, we were able to find only fractures of her body because she was on her mother's body, as you know, she is holding her here, and there was a massive discharge of M16s in the thorax area. The small body of Maria de la Concepcion was totally fractured. We were not able to identify but very few pieces of her skeleton. The human remains that we found in the community of La Joya are by and large of children. So like in the case of the massacre at El Mozote, the majority of the people we were finding belonged to children. And it was in this moment that I thought, like I had thought before in El Mozote, what it would be like to return to this place sometime, somehow, and to work in art with children of the same age of the ones we are now exhuming. It appeared to be an inconceivable thought at the time, something that it was so impossible that it felt obscene in the Greek way of saying, out of sin, not possible. In thinking about your observation, Patrick, about the walls, I would look around and see the walls wounded in the same way that people were wounded. And it occurred to me that those were walls of sorrow, that there were no windows possible. There were 2 priests in Perkin at the time we were working in the exhumation, Father Esteban, a Jesuit from Spain, and Padre Rogelio, who is from Belgium. And Father Esteban sent me a note when I was in the exhumation saying, quote, "I know you are an artist. Paint a mural at El Mozote." Okay. So, just for the record, at El Mozote we couldn't paint a mural because that was the site of the crime. Everything was protected. Nothing could be changed until the whole legal case was investigated and the outcome was found. But then Padre Esteban said, well, come to Perkin. I have to tell you the story of the mural of the church. Okay, so I went to Perkin, and we were in front of the church, and he told me the story of the mural. The story of the mural at the Church of Perkin starts in 1990, when this mural was painted. And this mural has on the right side of the church the image of Monsignor Romero, and on the left side of the church the image of the Jesuits who were killed at Uca, together with the cleaning lady and her daughter. The mural was painted by someone who passed by. No one remembered who he or she was. There was no information about that. But what we did know, and this is what I was confronting at that moment, is that the army came and painted over with white. And so there was no mural. When I was there, when I first arrived in 1992, this is what I saw. This was, a white wall. So the invitation to paint the mural in Perkin was a very appealing one. The first visit to Perkin was in October, I think. And as I visited Perkin after that first visit in October, November, and in December I arrived to Perkin after the Argentine team had written and presented the report to the United Nations, etc. So I only arrived to Perkin in December, probably the 18th or the 19th of December. In the meantime, something amazing started happening. And because I am with the right crowd, let's call it a miracle. And the miracle was that from the whiteness of the wall, Monsignor Romero was emerging. And I saw it progressively, and it only happened in that part of the wall. And I thought, okay, if there is a message here, it's so clear. So I had never painted a mural until this second. And needless to say, I was very intimidated about the size and about what I was to do, which is bring back from the whiteness Monsignor Romero. But okay, here we are, working on that, and retrieving the image of Monsignor Romero in the right side and extending towards the left side. And in painting the left side, I asked the community what they wanted. And they said very explicitly that they didn't want anything connected to the war. They wanted people who were, doing vernacular things, children, crops, and it was very intimidating to have over 60 people behind me at all times telling me what I was doing wrong. Such as painting the corn as I see them in the supermarket showing, the grains. They were appalled. They said, get down from that scaffolding of wherever you are standing. We take you to a milpa. So they told me, if the corn would be growing like this, they would never reach the point where we can eat them. The birds, the rats, the snakes would get them first. You have to cover those mazorcas. So I did. It was really interesting. I also did not know how to do chickens. I'm from Buenos Aires. The first cow I saw was when I was 6 years of age. So needless to say, I am utterly urban. And the chicken looked to be walking on high heels. It was very funny. So I got instructed as I was working, and that I mentioned all this not only because it's really beautiful and funny, but because it gave me the understanding that this was not an art project. This was not about color, form, and composition. This was about every brushstroke you put on that wall, girl, is our history. Do it well. So for me, as I was painting, something completely different came forward in the understanding of what art may be, what art can be, what art was for this community at this point. So this is the mural of Archbishop Romero. Many people came. This was very beautiful. One day I arrived to the main square, and they had taken the benches from the church outside in the park, and people were looking at the mural as someone would be watching a movie, and just talking and telling stories about Monsignor Romero and what they thought they would say to him if he was there. So what I would say, the very thin membrane between life and death, or between the death, the real death, the physical death of Monsignor Romero and the community was very thin. It was as if death really was not an interference to communicate with Monsignor. I also like to say that Monsignor Romero is not unanimously beloved in Perkin then or now. How that happens? Well, it happens because in Perkin, before the war, there were, like in other places, people who were better off economically, who were not huge landowners, but landowners nonetheless. Those people left Perkin right at the moment that the war started. I'm making a generalization here. I would like to suggest that then, if you're interested, would look into information. But for respect of the time frame, I have to give a summary of what happened. So we would say the people who were better off economically, small or large landowners, left Perkin at the beginning of the war. And they returned after the war to claim their land and to start, again, being people quite noticeable in the area of Perkin. These people that are arriving after the war to Perkin are people who make the following connection. Monsignor Romero, FMLN, la izquierda, comunistas. Monsignor Romero, the FMLN, the left, communists. So, after this mural was there for about a year and a half, in the middle of the night was washed out. Gone. Gone forever, it seemed. And since 1993 until very recently, the mural of the Church of Perkin could not be painted because it brought enormous conflict in the community. At that time, though, when I started looking at the role of art, I kept on thinking about, the idea of returning eventually to El Salvador to work in art projects. And I was very happy to see that the community was wanting that. In fact, they did say, what would it take for you to come and create an art school here? So that's a piece of information about what took place many years after, which is that I was able to return to Perkin and create the program, the project we call Walls of Hope, the School of Art and Open Studio of Perkin. The School of Art and Open Studio of Perkin is a community building project through the arts. We like to say that it's a project of art, education, human rights, community building. And we didn't know this at the time, but we know this now, that the art school is functioning as a diplomatic tool. People from the right and people from the left have told me, what you have done with the school, politics never could manage to do. I said, don't forget that for the next project. Okay. One of the most wonderful successes of the school is that today is being run exclusively by Salvadorian artists. So it is a totally community-based school that has these wonderful teachers, artists, collaborators, administrators. Claudia Berenice Flores Escolero, Rosita del Carmen Argueta, America Argentina Vaquerano, whom we know as Dina. The one who is not here is Don Amilcar Varela, who teaches the wood sculpture classes, but he's also part of the school, and myself.
Ellas quemaron a la gente, le pusieron fuego a la casa y se vinieron a matar a los niños. Los niños los mataron por la noche. Yo escuchaba, pero no crean que es fácil escuchar que los niños, los hijos de uno estén muriendo y no pueden hacer nada. Pues.
You had the choice of either joining the combatants or you had the choice of fleeing because the army came in here and was pretty much killing anybody who looked indigenous. So you could either fight back or you could leave. Those were your choices.
I am talking about a community that survived a war of 12 years.
Perkin le dicen la capital de los guerrilleros.
Gente bastante humilde y se caracteriza por eso, por ser una colonia de excombatientes. Cuando se llega ahí y se le pregunta a cualquier persona de los que viven allí, le va a contar una experiencia de los que han tenido de la guerra.
El arte juega un papel importante en esto, en mantener en los pueblos y en las sociedades o en las nuevas generaciones memoria histórica.
In the year 2001, the mayor and the leaders of the community asked if we could create a school of art. The School of Art was not my vision. Emphatically, this was the vision of the community, and exactly because of that is so powerful. Printmaking classes, drawing classes, jewelry classes, photography classes, video classes, everything that we artists can produce as an offering, the community takes.
El interés que hay, incluso de personas que vienen de otros municipios, es también grande. Hacen un esfuerzo, un sacrificio para estar acá, ¿verdad? Porque quieren aprender y porque no hay en otros sitios un espacio donde podamos recoger estas expresiones.
We have a community of people that believe dearly that art matters.
El arte nos reúne a todos en una manera tan espontánea, tan bonita, una vivencia tan bonita, y donde todos nos sentimos que sí sabemos hacer muchas cosas y que podemos hacerlas.
Cuando yo veo las obras obras de arte que he podido realizar, me siento una persona con dignidad. Y esto es importante, superar la baja autoestima que la gente pobre a veces tiene, ¿no? El arte me parece en todo este contexto sumamente importante porque es una manera de reconciliarnos con nosotros mismos y de reconciliarnos después del conflicto con la demás gente.
Estamos tratando de expresar lo que sentimos o lo que pensamos de eso que pasó.
Es a través del arte, es a través de una fotografía, es a través de una canción, es a través de una pintura que tú puedes educar a la nueva generación. En primer lugar, para que nunca jamás se vuelva a dar una guerra entre nosotros en nuestro país. Tenemos que hablar de esto para que no se vuelva a repetir. Tú no miras todo. Hay algo más que no se ve. Hay que buscarlo, y ese es el papel del arte. Buscar algo más de lo que nuestros ojos alcanzan a ver.
Beautiful, no? I want to thank you. I want to give credit to two wonderful students from the California College for the Arts, Josué Rojas, who is Salvadoreño, and Benedicto Flanagan, who came to Perkin 2006 to work in different projects, and they made this little video. So for us, the creation of murals has been a very prominent part of the School of Art. And in part because, and this is something that was really corroborated later when we started traveling to Guatemala, for instance, that there are many people in these communities who are illiterate and who are very aware they will continue to be illiterate. So for them, in their own words, murals are books of history without words. So whenever we ask a community, what you want to do? They come forward and they say, we want to create a mural about such and such, sometimes with very clear guidelines that for us artists are very helpful because they seem to have it already totally planned. It's a matter of just putting on the wall. That's their personal history. So this is one of the murals created at the House of Cebes, la Casa de las Comunidades Eclesiales de Base de Morazán. It's an agency that emerges from the Catholic Church, very active in community building through the war and after the war. And Padre Gustavo Gutierrez spoke yesterday for so long to us about poverty. And the way the people of Perkin and Cebes wanted to acknowledge the Last Supper was by having all people who are poor, who are martyrs, who were killed in the war, or people who were killed for political reasons because of their belief system. So including then Christ, who in this case is Don Cecilio. Don Cecilio was the model for Christ, and he lives in the community 10th of January, la 10 de enero, and he was a combatant of the FMLN. So here you have the list of the people in the first row and in the second row. In the meantime, I just want you to look at what Monsignor Romero has in front of him. They put the best roasted chicken for Monsignor. So this was a very plentiful Last Supper. We didn't have bread and wine like traditionally is remembered, but fruits from Morazán and tortillas and quesadillas and whatever. But para Monseñor Romero, el pollo asado. And I thought that was fantastic. The woman to Monsignor Romero's left is Rufina Amaya Marquez, who at the time we painted this mural, she was alive. This mural was painted in 2006. Rufina died in 2007. So Rufina came to the christening of the mural. She was very moved of being part of it. So the presence of Monsignor Romero in Perkin expands in different directions. This is a mural at the local children's library, the garden painted by the children. And the mural contains the image of Padre Rogelio Poncele from Belgium, who still lives in Perkin, and Monsignor Romero and the children that are part of the children's life of the library. We were asked to create a mural at the very front of the House of Sebes, las Comunidades Eclesiales de Base. The mural you saw before of the Last Supper is an interior mural, is inside Sebes. This is outside Sebes. And it's a large wall, and the way we work is always, having communication with the people from the community. Very clearly, they wanted to be the main part of the mural, Monsignor Romero, Padre Octavio Ortiz Luna, who was killed with 4 other young seminaries in El Amanecer, and Sister Silvia Arriola, who was murdered in Chalatenango. But then there was also a large mural to be completed, so they wanted to address the issue of water ownership. So it became a really interesting platform to talk about the past and the most urgent political situation at the time, which was that Tony Saca, president of El Salvador at the time, wanted to have a taxation on water, even rain water, like in Cochabamba, in Bolivia. Qué barbaridad, no entendió eso, lo quiso poner otra vez. Bueno, so it was claro. So here we were looking into Monsignor in the past and then the water today. Well, very good. So this is how a mural starts. I want you to see the first takes of Monsignor. Many drawings, many sketches, and then the image coming to the wall. And these are the wonderful artists, Claudita Berenice Flores Escolero and Rosita del Carmen Argueta, painting the main characters. I don't get even near. I paint grass. On the other side, I don't get near the main characters. And then the way we work is by having people come by and paint and leave and come back again, and children paint low because they are little, and the tall people paint high. We arrange. So the mural, or the theme of the mural, is the garden, the park, children that are offering a rose to Monsignor Romero. And here's Monsignor Romero, Octavio Ortiz Luna, and Silvia Arriola. This is the mural finished. So after the 3 main characters, then you have the door, and then is the scene of the water. The water starts, by rain, then becomes a lake, becomes a river. The river comes into our communities. We pipe the water. We own the water because it comes from the rain. We do not want taxation. Now, this became quite accurate when there was an uprising of civilian people in Suchitoto, and subsequently there was the army actions against the people of Suchitoto. So this connects the past to the present in a very vivid way. And Rogelio with Archbishop Romero and Padre Octavio Ortiz Luna. When we were christening this mural, someone who works for Sebes, Carmen Elena, said, "Do you know, we have to bring Octavio's father, who is still alive in Cacaopera, to come to Perkin. Is going to be a little arduous because the journey is difficult, but he has to come because he needs to see that his son is living with us today." And he did. I wasn't in El Salvador at the time, but he came and was happy to know that Octavio lives in Perkin. Quique, Don Quique, someone I dearly love and admire. He is the person who runs the library from the community of 10th of January, la 10 de enero. 10th of January is an emblematic day in the history of El Salvador. It is the day of the first big offensive created from the FMLN. So Quique one time came to my house and said, you know, all the time I was in the war, I thought that the only thing I wanted in my life is to have a small painting of Monsignor Romero. When I said, well, that's probably pushing the envelope, but I get the message. So we offered to paint a mural at the library in the 10th of January, which we did. And we painted Monsignor Romero with Doña Carmen Bros, who is a Salvadorian woman who grew up in the United States and went back to El Salvador. She has been extremely generous, creating scholarships for young people in the north of Morazán, not only Perquín, Segundo Montes, different locations, high school grants and into university. So here Monsignor and Doña Carmen Bros are together welcoming education in the north of Morazán. This mural was painted by a group of students and faculty from Mary Baldwin College in Virginia, and the community of 10th of January and the School of Art and Open Studio of Perquín. La Iglesia de Torola, the Church of Torola, Torola is north of Perquín, offered similar challenges that the church in Perquín, because the community is very divided. And this is the church called Santiago Apostol. One of the main conflicts at first was if Santiago was going to be represented as a saint or as a warrior. It took about 5 months until they decided that it would be presented both ways. So here you have Santiago Apostol, the warrior first, and then comes as a saint in a pilgrimage. Okay, it took incredible amount of time to make sure that everyone was okay with the image of Monsignor Romero to the left. Very poignant image at the time, and especially today, because Monsignor Romero is accompanying us in our journey. Nos está acompañando en el camino. If that was potent when we painted the mural, it's so very potent today, when so many young people are leaving El Salvador. Para alegrar el ojo de Monseñor, to greet the eye of Archbishop Romero, we painted the park in front. So what you see here is what Monseñor sees from that wall. It was quite ugly before, and they said, we cannot have Monsignor looking at this ugly park. Let's make something beautiful. Okay, let's paint the park as well. You see, art is very magic. It gives all the solutions. This is the church in Perquín. It took 18 years to come to consensus. And the way it is telling the story, on the left side, there is the beginning of Easter's, the Palms, the Day of Palms, I think. I'm sorry, I'm not good in that. And in the right side, how it was resolved. They didn't want to have, they still today did not want to have a big image of Monsignor Romero. Because this is, as I said, FMLN, leftist, communist, we don't want that. Okay, all right, we got the idea. So how can we negotiate that? How we negotiated that is by having someone holding the image of Monsignor Romero and someone holding the image of John Paul II. We cannot change it for Francisco. It would be incredibly bad idea. But we lament that it was painted before Francisco. What you see here on the floor is that for Easters, the communities get together and create las alfombras, the rugs made with natural flowers and vernacular materials. So it's, as you can tell, just try to understand what we are doing here in the School of Art, why we say that is a tool of diplomacy. There were people who were coming to check if the size of the images were the same. In centimeter by centimeter, so we have to be very careful not to favor one with the others. But the good news is the mural is still there. It has not been defaced or changed or painted white as so far. So this is an abbreviated list of the works we have done since the creation of the school in 2005. Since 2007 until today, we have worked nationally and internationally. We have worked in other parts of El Salvador, but we have been also invited to work outside El Salvador, sharing or breaching what we call the Perkin model. It's not a name that I gave, but it's a name that it was given to our project. And our idea from the beginning, and still is, that our project is replicable. And it is replicable because it works and it exists, and there's so many conflicts that go from, let's say, the rainy season, the dry season. We still don't have a school. We still don't have a building. We have enormous economic challenges. We have communities that are in opposition constantly, etc., etc. Nonetheless, art can happen. And that, to us, is very inspiring, and I think it is inspiring for the people who invite us to work. So as you can tell, many of these locations in the world are conflict areas, or we work with people who are, by definition, largely survivors of state terror. So for the purpose of this presentation, I asked my friends in El Salvador to do some investigation about what would people tell today to Monsignor Romero. What would they ask for? Knowing that Monsignor is so present in their lives and has been always present, what would they tell him? So they wrote letters. These are some of them. And it was incredibly moving for me to read, because like in the mural in Torola, what they are asking is guidance in this journey, because so many people are leaving, so many young people are leaving.
Aquí tal vez tendríamos que escribir, como Dante, aquí empieza el infierno.
Cuando vengo en el camino, por las noches, yo le oro a Dios y le digo, Dios mío, guárdame. Cuídame, Señor, porque yo no quiero perecer en este camino.
Este camino es bien arriesgado.
No me voy a morir sin ni ir allá. Tengo que ir.
Una bestia asesina que un ratito puedes estar arriba y al rato ya estás sin una pierna.
Ese es un demonio el tren, es traicionero. Ese tren ha cobrado miles de vidas humanas, pero muchos no entendemos.
would recommend for you to watch the complete film. So, why do people leave? Why do so many young people leave? In the year of 2014, 54,000 unaccompanied minors have crossed the border. Why are they doing this? What is happening in their countries? What is happening today in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador? What I can tell you after going for so many years to El Salvador, living in Perquín since 1992 until now, almost regularly go every year. What I see from 5 years ago until now, a growth of violence, an increase, logarithmic increase of violence, the product of which is the total lack of economy in El Salvador, producing the peculiar effect that narcotraffic is the only profitable business today. This has many reasons, but I would like to offer one from the perspective of Morazán. When the peace accords were signed in 1992, many of the items of the peace accords were successful. Some were hugely unsuccessful. The ones that were unsuccessful, or one of the ones that was very unsuccessful, is the redistribution of land. Therefore, we are talking about the north of Morazán, and I'm talking only about that because it's the only place I know well. But I think it could be extended to the rest of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. We have a country that historically is an agriculture country that is affected by the effects of war and the effects of the time after the war, leaving no conditions of subsistence to the communities that are campesinas. They didn't have land before, they didn't have land during, they don't have land after the war. So that had created, from 1992 until today, a very fragile economy based on the remesas that Salvadorian people send from here. This is, my grandmother would say, bread for today, hunger for tomorrow. How long can this last? We are looking at the effect of how this is not sustainable when narcotraffic expanded from Mexico into the areas of transit, which is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And it is incredibly appealing because, as I said, it appears to be the only profitable business. With total candor, most of the time, young people from the north of Morazán engage in narcotraffic. And if they do not, sometimes, and this is what we are seeing now through the upcoming project I share with you, they are taken in by narcotraffic, and whoever gets in doesn't get out. So this year in April and May, the Salvadorian teachers and myself were invited, together with students and faculty from Mary Baldwin College, to work in a detention center in Virginia. There is a lot I cannot tell about this project. I signed about 150 papers, confidentiality agreements. So what I can say, this is a detention center for minors. There are 3 levels of detention: low security, high security, and solitary confinement. The reason for which the youth are here varies from being undocumented to being in a process of in-between detention centers because they have been identified as committed serious crimes. What is most astonishing about this is that regardless the fact that they are in a detention center, from the plus minus 32 youth that I work with, none wanted to go back to their countries, although it was a possibility. So the project was to work with undocumented youth in a detention center. I'm trying to be careful not to say what I mustn't. And we were initially allowed to work only with low security youth. But I talked to the people who ran this place and said, the way we work, we would particularly like to work with people, young people who are in high security. So I finally persuaded them that it was a good idea. It took a while, and Claudia, was the only person allowed to go in and transit from low security to high security, etc. But what we can say about this project is that it was created by 5 different groups of youth that never met. So how we work was by having the students from Mary Baldwin being the artist assistants who would interpret the work of the kids who were in high security areas. And I was coming in and out of these areas with sketches, with video, with the iPad. I had to learn how to work with that. And making sure that their vision was being projected into the mural. It was really fantastic, and it was beautiful. It was wonderful to work with them and to work with the students from Mary Baldwin who were exceptionally respectful about their role as assistants to the artists. That's hard for artists, Okay, we work all together as we usually do. And so what was the mural about? The mural was about La Bestia, the beast. They all had taken the train. So here we have the windows. The windows are these vignettes that open the wall, just as Patrick said today. The walls are now becoming windows. So this is the far left window right here, painted by an Honduran girl, age 15, who was forced into prostitution, sold as part of human trafficking. And she escaped from where she was. She had a very, very perilous journey to get to the border, and she gave herself up at the time of the border. Because she had been in this detention center, she said that now she wishes she could she would like to become an FBI agent in order to help other women like herself. The other vignette that looks as an execution is indeed an execution. This was painted by a young man, age 16, from Mexico. The story that he talked to us about is that he was in a public space with his best friend, who happened to be the husband of his cousin, and there was a shooting. A drug lord was killed. He, the painter of this scene, was identified as the responsible of the assassination, reason for which he was kidnapped with his best friend. And they were taken to a place where he didn't know where he was. His friend was murdered first with a massive discharge of ammunition to the thorax. He was still scared about seeing how the upper body part disengaged from the lower part of the body out of the fractures at the shooting. He was shown that scene and then taken to another place. He was going to be killed the next day. Incredibly, in this story, is that there was a small window on top, very top of where he was staying, through which he was able to escape. And he went through many journeys until he reached the border, crossed the border, and was detained. The next one is painted by a Salvadorian young man, age 16, who recognizes that he is in a scene of violence today. But he also sees the future as a possible change. He sees the difference between one and the other, possible and impossible, as being caught in between sliding doors. But he hopes for something better, and he acknowledges that what he has and what he's escaping from is not where he would like to return to. The next vignette was painted by an Honduran boy, age 16, who painted the center, the detention center. This is what he had today, and the only thing he can think about. No, he doesn't have hopes. No, he doesn't have any imagination about the future. What he has today is this day, this life he doesn't like, but he has lost even the right for hope. The next vignette was painted by a Guatemalan boy, age 15, who at the time of 9 was left abandoned by her mother and father, and he didn't see them ever again. He reconnected to his sister, who was a few years older, to whom he adored, and the sister committed suicide when he was 10. So he was pretty much on his own until he left Guatemala. And when he painted this image, I was so surprised, thinking, well, looks like a Virgin Mary. Is she the Virgin Mary? And he said, well, yes and no. I'm not painting her because I'm a religious person, but I'm painting her because she's a mother. And so many mothers in Guatemala today have to see their own sons being killed. And that's why I'm painting her. The next vignette was painted by a young man from Honduras, age 16, who painted what he really would like to have if he ever succeeds in going back to Honduras in a peaceful way. He wants to have a big house and a place where there would be cinema and a store, and above all, a discotheque open 24 hours a day. Okay. And the train enters a tunnel, which is not a dark tunnel. It is a translucent tunnel. It's really beautiful, the image. It's not dark and menacing. It's transparent and full of hope. And in fact, it has the word faith written in many languages in front of it. And the image of the dove is painted by a young man from Honduras, age 15, who has a great voice and who would like to make music about their stories. And this is the mural. Somewhere there is the image of Christ. And that was painted, the idea of painted Jesus Christ in that position, in that location, was an idea from a Salvadorian boy, age 15, who had escaped one of the gangs and who did not want to go to El Salvador. He'd rather stay here in prison than going back. And in fact, I asked him at one point, what is what you want? Thinking about the mural, what is the image you want? He said, what I want, I would like to have the certainty that at the end of this year, I will be alive. But I don't have that certainty. So he brought this image of Jesus. So I thought, is this hope? He said, is hope, is not hope, is Christ, is Monsignor Romero, is all of us who suffer and no one remembers that we are suffering. Is all of us who think that when we come to the north, we'll have a better life and we don't have it. It's all of us who we think are old and we are actually very young. Thank you.
About 10 minutes so people can ask you questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Claudia.
Thank you,
I'm still a little dizzy. We have time for some questions, some interaction, so I'd like to invite people who would like to address her. Yes?
First of all, I'd like to say that your description of the process of creating the mural, with the participation of all the people, is very moving. It almost seems to me like an example of incarnation.
you.
The question has to do with tutela legal
Mhm.
in San Salvador.
Mhm.
As you know, their status has changed, and now they reside, at least last time I checked, was with Grupo Maíz,
Mhm.
in the offices of Grupo Maíz. Has
Yeah.
there been any change in the efforts of the investigations of some of the massacres that they were investigating from El Mozote? Has that situation changed at all?
Well, you know, tutela legal is going through many changes because, as you probably know, because you brought up the question, it was dismantled by the Catholic Church. So they went through this shock first and then recomposing. And as far as I know, and this is from last month, in July, I was with David Morales, who now is the Señor Procurador de los Derechos Humanos, but he was very close to Tutela Legal. So what he was saying is that now Tutela is being reorganized, is now an NGO with the name of Maria Julia Hernandez. And in terms of the investigation, I think they have pending cases that are almost historical cases, but at this point they are not in the process of carrying on any of those investigations because they still have to recompose as an agency. Thank you.
Yes, Monsignor?
Thank you, Claudia. I'm Bishop Ramirez from Las Cruces, New Mexico. It was so inspiring.
Gracias.
So uplifting and full of hope. I just wish that that all children of the world would have the opportunity to be artists. I know in some places, like in Venezuela, they teach them music, classical music, with the sistema, and they produce the now director of the Philharmonic in Los Angeles, Dudamel.
Sí,
So,
es cierto.
children have this great capacity for art. But, you know, right now, some of us are wondering about the beatification and canonization of San Romero. But I think that this film would be good for Pope Francis to see, and for whoever is in charge of causes for the saints in Rome, because they would be convinced that Romero is in the hearts of the people,
I think
and in
so.
their minds and in their memory. And every day they think of San Romero.
Every
If
day.
they would see this, I think the cause would be pushed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I will be honored to go and tell Francisco.
While you were talking about the murals, I kept thinking about a mural that I have seen. It was on the cathedral, face of the cathedral in San Salvador. I knew the man responsible is Fernando York. And I've seen a film about him, how he went up to La Palma, which there were a lot of islands up there. He began to teach very simply. They thought he was kind of a hobo, or what do you call it? But he started painting, and he started a school of art up there. And his idea was to try to transform that village. And in many stores today, you can see objects, crucifixes, or things that, and I couldn't believe it. I think one night, the Archbishop of San Salvador, I believe, said, let's get rid of that mural. And all these pieces were chipped off, and he came up to the States a year ago, and he spoke at the library in Evanston, Illinois, showed a film, and in parts he was just crying that this had happened, and speaking about how a mural can be whitewashed, or how it can, and I kept thinking of this. I don't know all the reasons why, but there was another thing that Romero's process was being stopped again, and the bishops there were going to decide what's the best way to have his beatification. And I thought, well, when he was bishop, many of the other bishops were completely opposed to him. And I thought, oh yeah, give it to that committee. That's great.
Thank you. Yes?
Can I just ask a silly question? I'm looking at that picture there, and that's from Peking itself?
No, that is in the mural behind you're talking about.
Yes.
Is in Osnabrück in Germany.
Oh, okay, because I saw the Brandenburg Gate there.
Yeah, we
Very
good, very good. We painted this mural last year with students of social work from the University of Osnabrück and 15 migrant women from all over the world. African women, Eastern European, Mongolian women. It was a very politically charged mural, given the delicacy of the issues regarding migrants in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes?
I wonder if anybody has given a thought to the healing aspect of putting out images, especially the images of violence, and whether this is a tool that can be used with especially young children who may not have language to express their fears and their situation.
Well, you bring a very important and very delicate subject, which of course I don't have an answer to. I only have a visitation of the answer. In terms of the education of children, we have said very early, and this is very difficult to sustain in Perkin, our work is political but is not partisan. Sounds like a catchy sentence. I cannot tell you how arduous it is to work with that in the front line, meaning in a place that is totally confronted with politics, as if the war ended yesterday afternoon. We have said very early, in this school everyone is welcome. The FMLN children, the Arena children, the children from the evangelical churches, the children from the Catholic churches, etc. And our main effort is to give support to children and youth. That's our vision. The first part of your question, however, regarding healing, I would like to answer this taking ownership of the answer, not speaking for other people, but only for me as an Argentine, and also after many years of empirical observation. And what I have to say is that for certain maladies of the heart, there is no healing. There isn't. There is the possibility of coexistence, which is not an amendment of what has happened, rather an early observation of the damage with a pursuant exercise of hope that this mustn't happen again. But one is not the other. But that's Bernardi talking.
Okay, I'm watching the clock here. Should we have one more? I have a hand here. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Claudia, for a very moving presentation. I follow the news somewhat in El Salvador. My sense is that violence is less in Morazan province. I'm wondering if that's your observation, and would you attribute that at all to these kinds of programs?
You are correct in bringing the concept that in Morazan there is less violence. I would love to tell you that is because of our efforts. I don't believe that's the reason. I believe the reason is poverty. I mean, there is no drug transaction. People don't have money to buy food, let alone having any kind of extra money for drug trafficking. I think in this particular event, poverty has saved us a little longer. But you know, drug dealing is in Arambala, 2 kilometers from El Mozote, 2 kilometers from Perkin. We are about 20 centimeters to have that problem be part of our daily concern.
Okay, I have to end the questions now. Roberto has some comments, and we'll move on to the next stage.
First of all, I think this is fantastic, and that we're putting in a book on these proceedings, and we're going to be working very closely with herself in works of art, getting proper permissions and all that sort of thing. And we've signed a contract with the publisher for that. So I think this will be an important dimension of that effort. The second point I would make is Ricardo Ramirez, the bishop here,
following the payment. He was very important at Aparecida in Brazil as an intermediary between the U.S. bishops and the Latin American bishops, and even was granted the right to vote, quite unusual. But he's coming for our Gaudium et Spes celebrations in March, which will include the anniversary of Romero, and he will be celebrating liturgy at that time with us, and also giving the annual Romero address. So just to let you know that ahead of time, and we're very happy he's here during these days, and we're grateful for that. And just two observations. One is that reference was made to Octavio Ortiz, who found a type of residence in Perequín. I was sent over to the Mesa Grande, the refugee camp of Salvadorans in Honduras, and by CRS. And in any case, I met two people there, came up to about here, short and powerful like Lucado. And there was a gentleman and his wife, and they said that somos delegados de la palabra, we're delegates of the word, and our son was the second priest, Salvadoran priest, murdered in El Salvador, Ortiz. And they said, we've decided to give our lives to carrying out his priesthood. One last word before you get fresh air and walk to lunch and all that sort of thing. The British have bombs too, but the British bombs they're dry bombs. And we've got a British dry bomb who's going to show up here about 1 o'clock. And that's Filipkowski. And she took you in one direction, and this gentleman will take you in another direction, and put them together and get a nice package. So enjoy your time. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask you to thank our speaker.